I'm excited to be here today and to tell you about something a little different than what you've heard about this morning. I'm actually going to tell you about what we've learned from behavioral economics through analyses of data big and small and A/B testing about how we can improve decisions. And I want to start by telling you about an idea for helping someone named Liz Lemon. For those of you who aren't familiar with Liz Lemon, she's the lead character from NBC's former hit show 30 Rock. And her character is a 30-something exec who works too much, exercises too little, and is generally a disaster when it comes to self-control. I'd like to make two plausible assumptions about Liz. First, assume Liz wishes she exercised more but lacks the willpower. And second, assume she has a thing for trashy novels but feels guilty wasting her time reading junk. I'm going to tell you about an idea for solving both of Liz's problems that I call temptation bundling. The idea is simple. What if Liz only allowed herself to read trashy novels when exercising at the gym? She'd stop wasting time at home on literary garbage and start craving trips to the gym to find out what happens next in her latest thriller. Not only that, but she'll enjoy her novel and her workout more combined. She won't feel guilty reading the novel, and time will fly at the gym. Now, as important as it is to increase exercise and reduce wasted time, temptation bundling can solve many other dual self-control problems as well. For instance, imagine you're trying to watch your waistline, and you also have a difficult mentee, let's call him John, at work, who you should spend more time with. What if you only let yourself to go to your favorite burger restaurant whose burgers you crave while spending time with John? You'd spend more time with John and eat fewer burgers when you should be dieting. Or for the ladies in the audience, imagine only allowing yourself to get a pedicure while catching up on overdue work emails. These are all examples of ways that temptation bundling can solve multiple problems for us at once. Of course, an important question is, does it work? And to find out, my collaborators and I ran an A/B test where we looked to see whether or not people exercised more when they were given access to tempting audio novels only at the gym on iPods that were locked away there versus people who could access their iPods anytime. And we found that indeed it had significant benefits. Not only that, but the majority of participants at the end of our study were delighted to pony up cash to pay us to take away their own iPods and lock them at the gym in monitored lockers so they could only access them when exercising. So this is an opening example that I wanted to use to introduce a new concept to you called choice architecture. This was best described, I think, in the book Nudge by Dick Thaler and Cass Sunstein, which came out in 2008. And the idea is that everywhere where we make decisions, we're being influenced by our environment, to some extent, by the architecture around us. I think this is best illustrated by an example of a cafeteria, a setting we're all familiar with. When you walk into a cafeteria, something comes first, something comes last, and the first thing you encounter when you're up there with your tray is more likely to end up on your plate than the last thing you encounter, because your tray's empty. It turns out there's no such thing as neutral architecture or neutral design here. Something has to come first and something has to come last. And the person who's laid out the cafeteria, whether they realize it or not, is a choice architect influencing your decisions. So I'd argue, and others have argued before me, why not be a wise choice architect? Why not try to improve decisions and facilitate better choices by perhaps putting healthier foods first? Or in the case of the gym, by facilitating temptation bundling. Let me give you a couple of other examples of good choice architecture. This is a photo of a urinal in the men's airport restroom in Stockholm, Sweden. And they were having a problem in this restroom. Tired folks getting off of flights were not aiming very effectively, and there was a lot of spillage. So you could solve this in a lot of different ways. You could hire more janitors, put up signs begging people to pay closer attention. But a clever choice architect who understood decision-making and psychology came up with a different solution. They etched a little fly in the urinal, giving people something to aim at, and reduced spillage 40% year over year. Here's another example of great choice architecture. great. Now that you recognize good choice architecture, you'll also recognize bad choice architecture. So what I want to do with my remaining time with you is talk a little bit about some principles that we have gleaned from both A/B testing and analyses of data big, frankly, and sometimes small, to figure out how we can systematically promote improved decisions through wise choice architecture. I'm going to give you a series of principles. The first principle I want to highlight is the power of setting helpful defaults. And the default is the option you end up with if you take no action, if you simply accept what's offered to you without opting out. This is, I think, the most amazing graph illustrating the power of defaults, though there are many. It was published over a decade ago in Science magazine, and what it shows is differences in the rate at which Europeans elect to be organ donors as a function of their country of origin and as a function of that country's policy on whether being a donor is considered the default. So in some countries, like the US, you have to opt into being a donor. It's a simple process here where you go to the DMV, check a box, sign your name when you're getting your driver's license, and instantly you're a donor. Other countries, you have to simply opt out. In all these countries, it's quite frictionless, and you might think people would have strong opinions and strong values that would guide this decision, and yet what you can see is this enormous gap between countries where the default choice is to be a donor versus those where it's not, about an 80 percentage point difference. There's a couple of reasons for this, we think. One is that we're inertial. We simply are lazy, and even a small act is something that we often fail to go through in order to change. Another is that we take whatever the default is to be the policy recommendation, and that can be very powerful. So first principle, remember to design your defaults wisely whenever you're creating a system because they change behavior tremendously. Second principle is to prompt people to plan when you want to help them follow through on intended behaviors. So for instance, imagine you have an employee, and that employee wants to go to the gym tomorrow. You might be able to help them by asking them a series of questions and helping them form a plan, like, when do you plan to go to the gym? Where do you plan to go to the gym? How do you plan to get there? And this works because, one, it helps the person think through obstacles, and two, it also embeds their plans more firmly in memory and associates a cue, that time when they said, oh, I'll go to the gym at that time. When they look at their watch and see that time, they'll realize, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing now. So we tested this in an A/B test with thousands of people at a large employer that was holding free on-site flu shot clinics. And we sent out different reminder mailings in our A/B test. Some people were randomly assigned to get a standard mailing, letting them know the dates, times, and locations of free on-site flu shots. In our B condition, employees were given exactly the same information, but were also prompted to write down the date and time when they intended to get their flu shot, or to make a plan. And we thought this would work for the reasons I just articulated. Now, this is not an appointment card. You're not mailing this back to anyone. You're simply filling this out in the privacy of your own home. And yet what we found is that this significantly increased flu shot take-up at the on-site clinics, as well as overall. And actually, these effects are more than double the size that I'm showing you here when we look and zoom in on flu shot clinics that were being held for one day only rather than multiple days, where the costs of forgetfulness are particularly large. Third principle I want to highlight is the power of leveraging social norms, or our tendency to want to follow the herd. And this is nicely illustrated by an A/B test that was done at a hotel. This hotel tried different messaging to try to encourage people to reuse their towels. Some people saw a standard message, help save the environment. In the B condition, people were encouraged to join their fellow guests or follow the herd, the majority of whom were helping to save the environment by reusing their towels. And this second message was dramatically more successful in increasing towel reuse. This has been put to great use by a company called O-Power that actually sends out mailings telling you about your recent utility use. And not only do they tell you about your use, but they tell you about your comparable neighbors living in similar homes and your most energy efficient neighbors, making you feel the need to follow that herd and become one of those types. And what we see is that in A/B tests, what this company has shown, year over year, this reduces energy consumption about 3% reliably. It turns out we not only follow the herd when the herd is others, but we also look to our own past behavior for signals of what's appropriate. And sometimes we don't remember that past behavior and need a little nudge or a little reminder. This is an A/B test conducted by the Red Cross that I partnered on, and we tried something really simple. What they did is they simply added a line to their mailing to previous donors. Previous donors were assigned to A or B, the controller reminder. Everyone had donated previously, but some people were reminded of the date of their previous gift. Hey, you do this. This is something you do, you donate. And it turned out that that significantly increased donations in response to this mailing. Fourth principle that I want to highlight is the power of creating accountability, making people feel accountable to someone for their decisions. And my favorite A/B test that illustrates this is one that was done in a Michigan primary about a decade ago. Registered voters were sent mailings. Some were actually in a holdout group, but those who were in the treatment groups were assigned to different types of mailings. One of the mailings let people know they were being watched by researchers. They were reminded that their voter record is public, not who you voted for, but whether or not you voted, and that a scholar was actually studying their behavior and would check and see if they'd voted in this upcoming Michigan primary. A little bit of accountability. Here's the strong accountability condition. Some people were told that these are the voter records, for all of your neighbors in the last 2 elections, and they're receiving this too with your name on the list. And actually, we'll be updating you and all of your neighbors after this election so everyone can see who voted in this upcoming primary. Pretty aggressive, but amazingly effective. So being watched relative to control no mailing increased turnout by 2.5 percentage points, which is pretty good. But this accountability to neighbors increased turnout by 8 percentage points, which to my knowledge is the single largest increase in voter turnout from any mailing that's ever been sent. Incredibly powerful tool. Fifth and final principle I want to highlight is the power of capitalizing on fresh starts. Some of my research has looked at moments in our lives when we feel extra motivated to pursue our goals. There are certain times when we wake up, we get out of bed, and we really feel like we can do more than we could on the day before. And one of those days that we all talk about a lot is actually the beginning of a new year. At the beginning of a new year, we set resolutions, we talk about them with our friends. It's actually a social ritual. And we feel like we have a fresh start. We feel like we have a clean slate. Last year is behind us. It's a new year. It's a new me. There's so much more that I can accomplish than I've accomplished in the past. And it turns out we feel this way not only at the start of a new year, but at the beginning of lots of new cycles to varying degrees. So the start of a new week, new month, following celebrations of holidays, and following birthdays. My research has shown that this actually leads to changes in behavior that can be quite meaningful. So in one study of undergraduates' gym attendance, we actually see that undergraduates exercise dramatically more frequently earlier in the week, month, year, semester, following school breaks, and following birthdays, with the notable exception of 21st birthdays. And I'll let you speculate as to why those might be special. We see the same patterns when we look at Google searches for the term diet. They also spike at these fresh start dates. And also when we look at when people create goals on a goal-setting website, whether those goals are health-related or health-irrelevant, we see spikes at these fresh start moments. So together, this suggests that if you're thinking about when to provide tools or encouragement to people to follow through on their goals or start new good habits, these fresh start moments may be particularly opportune opportunities for doing so. Okay, so let me wrap up by just highlighting what I've shared today. Through big data and A/B testing, behavioral science has come up with all sorts of interesting solutions to problems, and there are many more solutions lurking that through analyses of data and new A/B tests that you conduct, you can find to improve experiences. So these are the principles we've talked about today. I hope you'll use them, and I hope you'll come up with new ideas as well. Thanks very much for your time.